what's up everybody? Welcome back. Today I wanted to talk to you about your 50 objects projects. For this assignment, we started in class by making a list of 75 to 100 random objects. We said that if you had trouble coming up with that many random objects, that it was okay to use some categories to get you started. So some of the categories that I used were transportation, musical instruments, foods, animals, and for my fifth most complicated or complex category, I chose emotions or feelings. I chose those because they're not necessarily something that you can see, touch, or feel, and it would give me a good challenge later on. If you're not really confident in your drawing abilities yet, maybe you want to hold off and only do objects that you can physically see and touch in the real world. So after you have your list of 75 to 100 objects, what I'd like you to do is either underline, star, or highlight 50 of those objects that you definitely want to include on your project. Now, it's important to know that you're not just restricted to the objects on your list. That's going to be like our idea home base. And we can kind of jump off or go away from that home base if we get other ideas while we're working on the project. But again, this is just to get us started thinking about some of these crazy different objects that we can put together. So after you've brainstormed, you've made your list, and you've distilled it down to 50 objects, what I'd like you to do is start doing some practice sketches. We can do these in our sketchbook, and I'd like you to do a total of 10 practice sketches. Now these are just sketches, so they don't need to be finally realized drawings. I have some examples that I've cut out of my drawing, and I'm going to explain in a moment why I cut them out. But let's take a look at them first. So here's a couple of the objects that I chose to draw from my list. The first was a Volkswagen Beetle. Notice that this is a really rough little sketch. I've gone ahead and given all of the outlines, all of the inner edges, and I've even applied some of the core shadows, the shadows on the inside of the form. I could also include some of the cast shadows, and this would make this drawing look a little more realistic, and it would give us a better sense of where this sits in the world, like on a street. Next up, I drew one of my other forms of transportation. This was a spaceship. So again, you can see I've got all the outer and inner edges, and I've even started to apply some of the core and cast shadows. From my musical instruments, I chose an African hand piano. This is called a kalimba. I thought this is kind of a cool, unique object to include, so I drew that. Again, outlines, inner edges, core shadows, maybe a couple cast shadows in there, but not anything underneath. That's okay. Next up, this was from my feelings or emotions list. I chose the word tired. I did a Google search and I found this image of a student sleeping on a desk with a cup of coffee. I thought it was a really good, straightforward symbol to represent the idea of being tired. Again, notice it's a really rough sketch. It's not realized or finished, but it does what it needs to do for our purposes right now. After you have 10 sketches, you're going to bring them up to myself, and this gives us an opportunity to talk about where you are with the project. It gives me an opportunity to share some ideas that I might get from looking at your project, and for you to let me know what you're frustrated with, what you're struggling with, and what you think you're doing really well. After we've agreed that your sketches are okay and that you're ready to move on, what I'd like you to do is take your final paper. We're going to work on a 12 by 16 format, which is a rectangular format. You can hold it horizontally or vertically. That's up to you. When we begin sketching on this paper, we're going to sketch really lightly so that if we make any mistakes, not if, but when we make mistakes, because we're all human and we're going to make mistakes, we can correct and erase those out. You can see that I've used the rule of thirds, which was one of our compositional strategies, to make the bug the focal point of my drawing. All that means is that it's getting more attention than some of the other objects. I've done this through two ways already. One was by putting it at the rule of thirds. What's the rule of thirds, you say? Let's talk about that. So the rule of thirds states that if we divide our paper into thirds, so we have 3 thirds going vertically, and we also have 3 going horizontally. Where those points intersect is where I put these stars. If we put an object on any of these placements on your paper or your canvas, this is going to create a really wonderful focal point. It's wonderful because it's off-centered. It keeps us from creating what I call a bullseye composition. Anytime you put something right in the middle of your paper, it's going to be kind of boring. So if we put it off-center, it's going to have more interest for the viewer. It's going to hold our attention longer. Another thing that I did in my drawing was I made that Volkswagen Bug slightly larger than the other objects. By increasing the scale, or making things larger, you're going to directly affect the way the viewer looks around the piece. The larger objects are going to get more attention than the smaller objects. In art history, we call this hierarchical scale. I don't expect you to know that, but I just like saying that word. So here's my rough sketch again. I'm using the rule of thirds, scale, and then there's one other thing that I'm using that I'd like to see you try and experiment with: overlapping. I made my Volkswagen Bug sit in front of my spaceship, so the spaceship actually looks like it's behind it. By doing this, we're creating depth or space in our drawings and paintings. And this is really fantastic because not only can we look up and down, left and right, but now we're starting to be able to go into our picture, which is going to make our picture way more interesting than just back and forth, up and down. So once we've blocked in everything lightly with pencil, then we can come back in and start using our colored pencil, our markers, our ultra-fine point felt tip pens, and any other drawing materials that you want to bring in from home that you really want to use on this project. Our main goal is to have a lot of variety or difference and to have a really exciting, interesting drawing to look at. 50 objects is a lot of stuff to fit on one drawing. So I'm looking for you to be creative and to think outside of the box about how you can do that in an interesting way. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm looking forward to seeing what projects you guys come up with. Have a wonderful day. See you later.